As promised, joining me now is Democratic Senator Adam Schiff of California. Okay, as always, there's a million things I want to ask you about, but let me just start with the details and the revelations about the birthday book over the last 24 hours. I played the bite of Trump earlier tonight. I think he was trying to make the point that the city is safe a block from the White House, but that aside, he said, it's not my signature and not the way I speak. Anybody that's covered me for a long time, no, that's not my language. You have in some ways covered him for a long time, is one way of putting it. What do you think?
I think all of the analyses that have come out that compare his signature, which looks virtually identical to his signature on other things, that compare his sketches with other sketches, that compare his language to the same phrases he has used, just shows this is another lie by Donald Trump. This is another illustration of his Roy Cohn philosophy of deny, deny, deny. I guess it's not surprising that he would deny it, but it's such a bald-faced lie to say that he never signed, that this wasn't him, it was somebody else. But it is sadly what we've come to expect. But I'm with you. I'm kind of surprised at the staying power of all this. When things like shooting a ship out of the water, a Venezuelan ship out of the water, might be in the news for a week or 2 weeks, this Epstein cover-up continues. And I think it has staying power because they so entrenched this conspiracy theory about the client list and all the rest of that, so entrenched it among their base for years that now all of a sudden they're having a hard time convincing their base that what they were saying before was all somehow, even though it came from them, a Democratic lie or hoax.
Part of this, I will say, I'm personally surprised also that it's still going, and also that it seems to have expanded in terms of what the scope might look like. I mean, we're talking about, Melanie Stansberry was here last week, she's talking about thousands of victims potentially. The scope of the cover-up seems bigger, at least than I think we knew a couple of months ago. One of the things that I think has also been interesting in that regard is there was reporting over the weekend about officials at JP Morgan and sort of the cover-up of some potentially in the finance industry. Your colleague, Senator Wyden, has asked the Treasury Department for more information about financial documents. You have more experience than most people in the Senate of like following the paper trail and getting to the bottom of an investigation. How important do you think the finances and that paper trail is to learning more for everybody?
Well, I think it's very important. I mean, generally, the rule of investigations is you follow the money.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of money going to Epstein, and it was going to him in cash, and it was going to him in large amounts. It had all the indicia, per this New York Times reporting, of people engaged in illicit activity. And you have some very sophisticated bankers who recognize this, who spot this. But at the same time, there's that tension within this big financial institution, JP Morgan. Well, he makes a lot of money for the bank. So what do we do with this? And I think you just, follow the money and see where it leads. There are other leads, too, that need to be followed up on. One of the things that really stood out to me about this, and as much as Trump lies, there are times also when he's very transparent. And the revelation that this woman who sadly took her life a few months ago,
Virginia Giuffre,
yes, who was a victim of Epstein trafficking, had worked in Mar-a-Lago. And Trump's complaint with Epstein, by his own admission, was that he was stealing women, stealing employees from Mar-a-Lago. What did he think Epstein was doing with those young women he was stealing from Trump's employment? That's a question that I would like answered. I think a lot of the American people would like answered in order to determine what's the president's knowledge, what's his culpability, as well as others in the finance area.
So much more to learn from these survivors who have just started speaking out very, very bravely. I want to switch gears because I just talked about this character, Bill Pulte, who I've talked about a bit on this show. And there's a new article that came out in the LA Times just in the last couple of hours about a letter written to the Department of Justice by your attorney, Preet Bharara, who I also know well and has been on the show quite a few times. Now, the piece reports that Bharara wrote, quote, that the Federal Housing Finance Agency Inspector General appeared to have asked the Fannie Mae Financial Crimes Investigation Unit to delve into Schiff's mortgage records at Pulte's behest, and that Pulte personally referred the matter to the Justice Department in May before the Fannie Mae unit had even provided him with its findings. So this seems to imply he referred it to the Department of Justice before he even had all of the information. Is there anything else? What else should we know about how he has handled this particular case?
Well, I think that it's pretty clear that Pulte is requesting records about the president's enemies to try to weaponize in a public way with false allegations of fraud. And what Pulte may or may not understand is, you know, should they pursue this stuff, he's going to be under a microscope. Should people at Freddie or Fannie or wherever have been participating in his campaign of retribution, all of this is going to come out. And so, you know, Pulte is already having problems now because his own family had more than one primary residence. 3 of Trump's cabinet members had more than one primary residence. And I'm not suggesting they did anything wrong, but it makes it so clear that this is all retribution. It's all a political attack on his enemies. And, you know, from my point of view, what people should be concerned about is not whether he's going after me or Letitia James or Lisa Cook per se, but rather that they're going to use the Department of Justice to try to silence their critics, to intimidate their critics. In the same way, they're trying to silence media organizations and silence universities and stifle law firms from representing unpopular clients. They want to cultivate this climate of fear. And in that context, I think for me and other elected officials, we need to do what we're urging universities and law firms and the media to do, which is to stand up to this bully and fight back.
There are people like Pulte who seem to be used as a pawn. And yeah, obviously he's a willing pawn. I guess we can see he's a willing pawn. I mean, part of what was written about in this piece, that Preparar told DOJ that Mr. Pulte's, and I'm quoting from the piece, misuse of his position should be investigated by a nonpartisan inspector general to determine whether Mr. Pulte's conduct should be referred to the Department of Justice for criminal investigation. We're not operating in a normal IG environment, unfortunately, but I assume you agree with him as his client. But how could that play into broader efforts to hold Pulte to account? Is there a system that still is in place right now that will hold him to account if they start looking into it, even though the IG system is a bit out of whack right now?
You know, I don't have much hope at the moment that the Department of Justice will investigate Pulte or the Inspector General's office, since they have decapitated all the leadership of any independence in the Inspector General's offices around the federal government. But I think it is important that a marker be put down, that those that are engaged in the abuse of government power understand that they will be held to account. And I was pleased to see, for example, the House Oversight Committee Democrats say they're investigating Pulte. They're demanding records from Pulte. And people at those agencies, should they try to destroy those records, are going to be held accountable. If not in this administration, then the next. So it is, I think, important to make the record, to demand the information, and to let people know that they will be held accountable.
Acquiescing is no way to make a dictator stop asking for more, I think, is the lesson. Senator Adam Schiff, thank you as always for being here.
Thank you.